I want to welcome you to the second of the Assembly Minority Education Committee members forums. We had one a few weeks ago at Suffolk Community College, and we got a lot of good feedback from educators and parents and stakeholders in this, and we're looking forward to getting a lot more testimony today. We thank you for all being here with us, and I thank my colleague Mike Montesano for welcoming us into his Assembly district today, and certainly thank SUNY Old Westbury for hosting us. And if I can quickly, I want to specifically thank our staff, some of whom came down from Albany to enable us to live stream today through the internet, and especially Vicki Johnson from our regional office, who had to deal with a bunch of logistics with the microphones, and I think got us a primary set, a backup, and a backup to the backup when a few days ago we thought we had nothing. So thanks to Vicki. She's outside here, I think. But we're going to get started with our testimony in a moment, but I just want to give any of my colleagues a chance if there's anything they wanted to say by way of introduction before we get started. Anybody?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank my colleague Ed Rod, a ranking member of the Committee on Education, for convening these hearings with Assemblyman Al Graff, who has taken the lead on this issue with the Common Core. So we welcome you all here. We're interested in hearing what you have to say so we could combine all the information in order to go forward on this issue. And I welcome everyone to the SUNY Old Westbury here in the 15th Assembly District. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Assemblyman Joseph Saladino. I too would like to thank my colleagues for spearheading this issue. I believe it's very important. I'm happy that we're holding this today in Nassau. I'm the Nassau Conference leader to our political party, and we are the minority party, but we are not the minority when it comes to being on the right side of these issues. I have stated publicly that I'm against using a one-size-fits-all for the Common Core. I strongly believe and have clearly seen the evidence that it brings down the successful schools while trying to raise the schools where there have been many problems for many years, some educational, many social. I believe that we must approach this with your testimony, your experience, your facts to push for a solution in Albany, and that's why it's so important that you're all here, and we appreciate your participation. We'll be coming out with many pieces of legislation to push for the right results to this problem, and all of us, including those members in the Minority Conference who are not able to make it today for many other reasons, business reasons and so forth, scheduling conflicts, but we all feel the same way. We are of one ilk when it comes to the fact that we believe a one-size-fits-all approach hurts our successful districts and hurts the children of all districts in the way in which it's being implemented. So again, thank you for your testimony. It has not fallen on deaf ears.
Thank you, Joe. And you heard from Joe and Mike Montesano, and we're also joined by Assemblyman Al Graff, our colleague from Suffolk, who sits on the Education Committee in the Assembly with me, and also Dave McDonough, who's also a member of the Education Committee. Our first person that is giving testimony today is somebody that's no stranger to the educational community, and that's our regent from here on Long Island, Roger Tillis. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Tillis, and we are looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
First of all, thank you for having this hearing. I think the more input we get, the better off we all are.
Roger, could you put your mic a little closer?
Sure. The better input we get, the better off everybody is. I'm in a interesting situation as a regent. I'm one of 17 regents. We are elected by the legislature, and we are elected by judicial districts. So I represent Nassau and Suffolk. I am one of 5 regents out of the 17 that don't represent a city. I say that because I think it's important to know where a lot of the race to the top issues come from. And they come from, in my opinion, the one-size-fits-all that Joe was talking about, the fact that every school district is treated the same way, at the same time as the Regent's whole program is on differentiated learning, to treat kids as individuals and teach them as individuals. We don't treat school districts that way. And I have the interesting opportunity to represent some of the very, very best districts in New York State. Out of 125, I would say, you know, the vast majority of them are very, very good districts. We have 4 or 5 that are considered to be high needs districts, and I have devoted a lot of time to helping them, and I think we need a different set of governance perhaps for those districts, but that's not for this program. I'm also the only regent that has had kids in the public schools. And I think that has lent me a different perspective than most. I'll give you one quick example. My daughter, who is now 19, is a learning disabled student. And she was learning at, I think it must have been grade 6, she was learning at the 4th grade reading level. The federal government came in as part of their program of Race to the Top and said every child has to be tested at their age level and not at the grade level that they're learning at. I raised the question at the Regents meeting because the Regents had to basically rubber stamp the regulations for the federal government. We were told that we would lose all of our special ed aid if we didn't go along with that. And I voted against it anyhow because I had a daughter. I said, how am I going to go home and explain to my daughter that here's a test that I want you to take that you're going to fail? We all knew, everybody knew that she would fail. And that's the way this was set up. The same thing with English language learners who are here for 1 year and 1 day. We know it takes 2 to 3 years for them to get a proficiency to take the ELA exam. And yet we test them if they're here a year and 1 day, knowing that they were going to fail. Some of the interesting parts of this, that there are only 2 required state tests that are not federal mandates. Federal law requires grades 3 through 8, ELA and math. Federal law requires 1 science exam in grades 3 through 5, 6 through 9, and 10 through 12. It requires at least 1 high school ELA and mathematics exam, which we use Regents for. Additional assessments of English language learners, NISSLAT, a different test, and alternative assessments for students with severe disabilities, more portfolio-oriented. The only 2 required state tests that are not federal mandates are the Regents exam in U.S. history and government and the Regents exam in global history and geography. And I say that not because we're exempt from any of the problems here, because I think, in fact, the Regents perhaps are some of the problem here. We think that, and when I talk about the Regents, I'll then try to explain where I come from, because I'm usually on the minority side, as you probably would understand better than most. I try to make my points heard, but again, I'm in a minority. It tends not to be a political party minority, but we're rather one of geographics, because we're only 5 out of 17 that don't represent a city. Race to the Top money came to New York because of a program that was put into place by first the federal government, then holding the purse strings of $700 million over the state legislature and the governor and the regents. The governor and legislature put together a bill that was required to get that $700 million, virtually all of which went to the cities. Long Island school districts did not reap much of the benefit of that at all. And yet we had to follow all the regulations of the Race to the Top program. We had to then vote on the regulations pursuant to the legislation that you passed, most of which required high stakes testing, required testing that would be linked to teacher evaluation. I, at that point, even though it was $700 million, voted no, and I had two other regents vote no, because to me it is a very bad link in general. I don't think a state assessment that is certainly not even a growth assessment because it's based upon a lot of algorithms should be used as part of a teacher evaluation. I sit on the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, the highest level of teaching accreditation in the country. There's about 100,000 National Board teachers, certified teachers. We use all kinds of growth measures for students as part of a teacher evaluation. But we don't use is a state assessment test, because we don't, and especially we certainly wouldn't use one that was given in the middle of the year based upon algorithms from the previous year. So I had a problem with that in itself. In addition, since then, we've had the rollout of the evaluation, a new state assessment, a new Common Core curriculum, and a recommended but not required curriculum based upon those standards. And I was having a discussion before. 3 years ago, when we adopted the Common Core standards, which I happen to believe are where we should be going. I don't believe in the way it's been rolled out, but I think that it offers us a potential opportunity to really raise our standards. And frankly, this is being adopted by 45 states. If New York can't hit those standards, certainly no other state can, because we're starting out way ahead of other states. But we need these standards to become ready to compete in the world. And as you can see from the newspaper articles and whatever, you've seen that other countries are moving faster, much faster than we are towards that. On Long Island, with our successful schools, most of them are, we are already competing with the rest of the world. Generally speaking, those who took the PISA tests, the world tests, from districts on Long Island, and there are a few around that actually took those tests, are right up there with the top of the world. When you add in how we do statewide, and you add in areas that are much higher needs than Long Island schools, then you get a real disparity in where we are in the world. I think that the Common Core is so good that I'm very, very distressed about how it's being rolled out. I'm distressed that all of these things happened in the same year. I would have preferred that the Common Core be introduced as it was and had some time to germinate. It takes time for teachers to understand what it is. It takes time for a curriculum to be developed, which at the time, 3 years ago, was required of teachers to develop their own curriculum. Last year, the state ed department, for the first time in history, said, okay, we've heard a lot of requests for a curriculum since teachers at the local level were having more problems developing that curriculum. So the state ed department started preparing a curriculum, which is, from what I understand, and I've talked to a lot of teachers, not a bad curriculum, pretty good curriculum. The problem is is that me? Okay. The problem is that curriculum was only maybe a third done at the end of the last school year. At the same time as the testing was testing was done as if all of the curriculum was in place, and indeed, because the Common Core is a cumulative process, fifth graders were being given a test of Common Core as if they had taken Common Core in first, second, third, and fourth grade, which meant that it was impossible to keep the same test results as we've had in the past. We knew they would be dropping because of those difficult areas. However, at the time, the commissioner said, and I went to Newsday's editorial board with him, and this question was raised. Well, if you know it's going to drop like that, why would you give it? And isn't that going to interfere with teacher evaluation, which is the same time? And the commissioner said rightly, it probably won't interfere with teacher evaluation because everybody is going down and it is all proportional. And that indeed turned out to be the case. We had very, very few ineffective teachers. I'll go into that in a second, which I had expected completely on Long Island. However, I raised the question, as my daughter had that problem, when she was asked to take tests that she was going to fail, year after year after year. What does that do to a child's self-esteem? And it is not to be underestimated, the self-esteem issues of how, and it's taken quite a long time for us to remediate that with our daughter. And I know that across the state, that's an issue, and it should be an issue. So the fact that scores went down 30% didn't affect necessarily the evaluations, but it certainly affected how a child looks upon his success when he's used to getting 4s and all of a sudden gets a 2. That is a problem. Going back for the teacher evaluations and why it was released on Monday, very, very few teachers in the state were ruled ineffective or rated ineffective. And in fact, I'll go one step further. It was around 5%. If you discount the cities, which, for instance, Syracuse had 40% of their teachers. Beacon, New York had 200 out of 280 teachers rated ineffective. And you spread that and you take those out of the equation, we're probably 1% on Long Island. Not that there aren't problem areas, because there are, but as I said before, I think that's a different issue. I think those are issues of governance more than they are of anything else. Basically, that's what I want to say, but we are in the midst of making some changes. We know that this was the first year of the program. We know that any new program, maybe even affordable health care, might need some changes someplace along the way. But certainly after the first year, or even before it's done. We know that we are going to be asking for a waiver from the federal government on testing special ed students at their age level, testing ELL students at 1 year and 1 day. There's got to be a different way to do that, and if we know they're going to fail, then check off fail on our national form. And there is a reason for that. You want to make sure that school districts are actually serving all the communities and not just a majority community. So there is a reason for why you want to have disaggregated scores, but not at the expense of self-esteem of students. We will be looking at the SLOs, the student learning objectives, which in many cases are a joke, I must say. I've seen them in operation. 80% of the teachers in the state had nothing to do with this testing. We're only talking the ELA and math tests for elementary school and middle school students only affected 20% of the teachers in the state. The rest of it was basically an entire local evaluation, part of which were student learning objectives, the concept of which is great. You want to set out at the beginning of the year where you want the child to go and then measure against that. That's part of what I would call a growth measure, but not having a pre-test which can be easily manipulated and was easily manipulated. Phys ed teachers in elementary school had to develop a SLO, a student learning objective. And so at the beginning of the year, they'd say, how fast could a kid run around the track? At the end of the year, how fast could a kid? Well, at the beginning of the year, they said, slow down. Slow down. I've actually heard that. And that's an example of where the slow testing, pre-testing especially, was really not a very effective operation, and that's going to be changed. We are going to change and ask for a waiver of having a 8th grade math assessment along with our Regents algebra assessment, and try so that students don't have to take both, which up till now they did. So we're going to be tweaking this, and that's why these hearings are so important, because we need to get the ideas, and we will be having, the commissioner will be having 16 of these hearings around the state, 4 of which will be on Long Island. And I'm hoping that he will hear a lot of what I hear every day. I have gotten over 3,000 letters in the last 5 days from parents, from teachers, from, related people. I can't say I've read every one of them. In fact, the Regents are an unpaid and no staff operation. So I am trying to be out there every day, and I'm very lucky that I have the time and the resources to be able to be out every day talking to people. But it's impossible for most of the Regents to do. They have jobs or they have other things to do. I know what those letters say, and I agree with almost everything in them. I think that it's good for the commissioner to hear it, and he will be doing that around the state in a format similar to the one we did last week in Oyster Bay. That worked very well. We had an hour and a half of testimony, and then the commissioner responded to that testimony, as opposed to the week before where it was the opposite way and it was not very successful. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer.
Just before I go to Assemblyman Graff for a question, I just want to acknowledge our colleague Brian Curran, who has just joined us, and Al.
First, Roger, I want to thank you for coming here today. And, I've been following some of the things that you've been saying as far as the Common Core. I do have a lot of concerns with Common Core and how it's rolled out, how it's presented. And the other thing that I have a concern with is there are certain, catchphrases that are put out there about, and I understand the premise behind Common Core is that if my kids are in New York and I move to, say, South Carolina, they'd be able to pick up right where they left off in another state. That's what they were hoping to accomplish. However, but what I've been doing is reading a lot of the ELAs, and I've been seeing the homework assignments that have been handed to children. I use that with my own experience as a, I have a degree in elementary education. I've actually taught in a classroom. I've done, I've been a sub, I've taken courses on child development, and much of the things that I'm seeing, whether I go into Engage New York and I read the curriculum and what a child is supposed to know or be able to do, I find it to be not age appropriate. I find it not to be cognitively where these kids will be at that age. And just to give you a couple examples, we were talking outside, and I'm not trying to sandbag here, but I want this to be out there. I can't figure out why a first grader, all right, 6-year-old, has to be able to point out ancient Mesopotamia on a map and discuss with me and discuss with me its significance to modern day civilization. I can't understand why a 6-year-old, all right, and we were at the last one that we had in Suffolk County. There was an individual's name, we had 3 people with doctorates, myself including, trying to figure out how to pronounce this person's name. And it was Hand-Sheet Suit. Most of the people in this audience will have no idea who that is. Is there anybody in the audience that know who that is? One.
Something to do with Egypt?
Okay. An ancient Egyptian pharaoh. First off, there's no way a first grader is going to be able to spell that. And second off, there's no way a first grader is going to be able to discuss with us what her relevance was to modern day civilization. That is totally age not appropriate, not developmentally appropriate. The other thing that I keep hearing is that we need to compete in the world market. And I keep asking the same question. Who are we competing with? Who are our competitors? Okay, most of the other countries that we're talking about, they're the size of a state. We lead the world in engineers, we lead the world in patents, we lead the world in all of this. I'm trying to understand which country are we competing with, all right, when it comes to this, the educational standards. When you go to China, what you have is they only take their students that are academically high achieving. So we're comparing apples to rocks, okay, because they're not giving us the same numbers. So that's another problem that I have, how Common Core is being rolled out. Who prepared this curriculum, do you know? Who prepared this for us? Was it Pearson?
Pearson mostly, but our state ed people with Pearson, yeah.
Okay.
And that curriculum, as I think I told you, was not a mandatory curriculum. It was one that was suggested because so many people had asked to have a curriculum based upon the Common Core, because we had required it mandatory that schools and teachers develop their own curriculum 3 years ago. Many did not do that, and many picked up the curriculum from the state website, Engage New York. But that curriculum wasn't even halfway done at the end of last year. And as a result, the testing didn't reflect what was being taught. And once somebody relies upon something, they have an expectation that it would be all done. So I understand that. The curriculum itself was obviously the outside contractor was Pearson on that.
Okay, and I'm not picking on you. I'm just, there's certain information that you'll have that I'm trying to get. That's what it is. The other thing, well, the teacher evaluations. On the teacher evaluations, with that one there, I mean, our schools were told that that they would receive reimbursement for putting those together. That was never put in the budget. So that was another one. Now, when we talk about the cost of rolling out Common Core, okay, I mean, the cost isn't going to the state. This cost is being passed on to the schools, correct?
Well, it's up to the state as to how
Well,
much.
right now, as it stands.
Sure, the legislature didn't have any appropriation for that.
Do we have an estimate on how much implementation of Common Core is going to cost us this year?
It depends on what aspects. Implementation of Common Core, including the assessment and the evaluation
This year?
that goes along with it. I don't have, I've asked some school districts for that, and I have not yet gotten the
All right.
total amount. It's a significant amount, and we're not done yet because there will be a good chance that we'll go to computer testing, which will cost even more.
Right, and is it true that some of these computers will just be specifically for testing?
Hopefully not.
Okay, but that's the way it is right now.
Hopefully not.
Okay.
Some are.
And my understanding is, the numbers that I'm hearing is about $1.2 billion to roll this out for this year.
That I don't think that that's the case, but I don't know. I don't know. The regents are policy-making people. The state ed department are the ones that would know the figures, plus the legislature.
Yeah, how much control does if the legislature decided to pull out of Common Core and pull out of Race to the Top, we would be able to do that as a legislature?
The legislature could. We would probably have to, the state would probably have to reimburse a good chunk of the $700 million, which was given on the basis of the contract that was signed by the state with the federal government.
There were certain benchmarks that we had to implement when we got to 700. How many of those benchmarks have we implemented already?
I don't know, but I know a significant amount. That the teacher evaluation using student test scores was one of those benchmarks. That's been done. The adoption of the Common Core by the state has been done. There was no requirement to adopt a federal testing system, so that, and we don't have one yet. If we had one at all, it would not be a federal one. So I mean, much of it has been done. The other is going towards turnaround schools, which again goes to the cities. Most of this money was directed not at achieving school districts, and I think it's important to know that I have suggested for the last 4 years, 5 years, that a lot of these requirements that are made for all school districts be waived when there is a successful district over a certain period of time, and you can measure success by whatever standard you want. But I've worked with a couple of people in the legislature who are working on those bills. I know Joe is, and Senator Martins has, and Senator Marcelino has, and Ed has. So I think it's going to be very hard. The argument I get back is one of political correctness, perhaps, more than anything else, that you're letting the districts that are already successful off of the requirements that every district has to take. And I said, yeah, because we have a twofold purpose as regents. We have one purpose is to try to close the gap between high and low performing districts, which this program has not been particularly successful at, and in 8.5 years we haven't closed that gap. But the second part, and so I think there might be a different way of achieving that, perhaps. And I think the number one way of achieving it would be to have a universal pre-K education, and yet we don't get that at all. The governor proposes incremental steps, and that I think every educator knows that would be the most helpful situation in terms of improving everybody's education, but especially in closing the gap. But the second purpose of our mission as regents is to be able to have our kids compete in the world. And I do think it is, I don't want to minimize what you said, but I do think it is a problem. We've had people come from China who produce many more engineers than we do because they're using their gifted, better students. But they don't have the creativity that our students have. We've had ministers of China coming here to try to see how we teach our students to be more creative, because they have technologically creative people, but they don't have the kind of creativity that we have. I'm very concerned that our emphasis on English and math and the testing programs that we have are cutting out what makes Long Island schools and United States schools much more effective than the rest of the world, and that's art and music and enrichment opportunities and social studies.
Well, one of the things that I'm looking at too, and I'm speaking to teachers, all right, and I'm looking at the curriculum, I'm looking at the suggestion, I'm looking at what teachers are supposed to do, and they're actually breaking it down for them. You're going to teach 5 minutes of this, you're going to do reinforcement. You're going to teach 10 minutes of this, you're going to reinforce. You're going to teach 5 minutes of this, okay? Now in the classroom, what happens, especially in the classroom, what we do is we teach to the middle of the class, okay? And then what we will do, we'll give work to reinforce what we just taught. Now, the kids are a little advanced. We might give them a little harder work to do to keep them engaged. However, the kids that weren't getting the concept, that gives us now the ability to go in there and make sure that they get that building block. Because each one of these lessons build upon the next lesson. The way they're structuring this, we're going to lose that. And that's a big concern to me, because you're going to lose the whole bottom of the class there. Kids learn in different ways, and, whether it's auditory, whether it's visual, whether it's textual, okay? Whether they need to write it down, whether they need to hear it, whether they need to see it, right? I think we're losing that with where we're pushing this curriculum. It's not going to work, okay? We're going to lose too many kids, and this, to me, is a nightmare. That's what it is.
This is why the regions have called for differentiated teaching, so that each of the kids at whatever level are getting a strong response. I'll just
Right.
leave it.
Out of the 17 regions, how many have taught in a classroom?
Quite a few.
How
Quite
many?
a few. I have.
That's one.
The Chancellor Tisch has. Regent Cashin has. Regent Rosa has. I'm I'm trying to think of who else might have taught. I don't know, but at least 4 or 5 or 6 of them have, yeah.
Okay. Because that's a big concern of mine, too, because I know in the Education Committee, I asked that question last year on the Assembly floor. How many of the staff people that were helping to write the laws actually taught in the classroom? And the answer I got was zip.
Well, the people that were actually helping to write the laws were what they call Regents Research Fellows that are not state employees. They were hired with the state education department. Staff has been decimated for, when I came in it was close to 4,000, now it's under 3,000. And for that's a lot of issues that go along with that, vocational rehabilitation, et cetera. So the regents, in order to prepare the application for Race to the Top, raised money privately and then hired in a staff of people, many of whom had no experience at all with schools. And yet they were the ones that were developing the Race to the Top application and are continuing to work on that. So maybe that's where the difference is. The regents themselves, as I said, are not, except for myself and maybe Chancellor Tisch, they're not day-to-day people. That we're not supposed to be. We're supposed to have jobs and whatever else and go to Albany once a month and listen to testimony from staff and then make a decision. I'm lucky, and maybe that's why I've been able to be on a dissenting course, but I go out and get a lot of, I talk to a lot of teachers, I talk to a lot of parents, I talk to a lot of administrators, and I'm out in schools virtually every day. So I get a different perspective than they do. Plus, I used to be a staff member at a state education department in Michigan, and I was on their State Board of Education 30 years ago. So I have a better understanding of how certain things work, and I don't like the idea at all of a Regents Research Fellows because there's no real accountability at all. They're not state employees. But it was felt that that was the only way that we would ever get an application and have this work done, because we didn't have staff to do it.
Okay, I don't want to hog the time, and I apologize to my colleagues. My last one is these forums that the commissioner is going to be doing, okay? Is he going to continue to just invitation only in these forums, or are they opening it up?
They will be open, and it's going to be up to the state senator that's running them. They will be, for instance, Senator Flanagan will be, as we did last week in Oyster Bay, Senator Marcelino had the forum. He invited school superintendents, PTAs, board members, union officials, and I would say half the people there were union people, and some students were there. So it was an open, nobody
How about
was...
parents?
Parents, that's what I said.
Because I found out about
Parents
that.
were very much involved.
I found out about it, and many other people found out about it on Facebook. There was no
Well,
advanced
I can
public.
tell you that given Long Island's social media and the extensive network that has been formed against the Common Core, over 20,000 have signed up on it. And I think that's where a lot of the letters that I'm getting from are coming from. I don't think there will be any question that people will be notified and well ahead of time of these sessions, and they are open. There won't be any stopping them. The senator will be working with probably the superintendents to bring in the people from their districts, within their districts. Nobody can go out, and the commissioner had nothing to do with the people who come to the thing. He's there as actually the format has been changed. The format will be that we will take and work very well, have everybody be able to come in with their comments, and then the commissioner and the chancellor and I will respond to those comments. And I think the commissioner found that very helpful. He said there was only one comment out of probably 40 that he didn't agree with. So I think we'll see very much more positive tone, and I think we need the information. We need that information.
Thank you very much.
Roger, thank you so much for joining with us. I have two brief questions for you, but I would like to thank you for representing our ideology and the ideology of Long Islanders as our regent. As one of the veterans in our conference and been a longtime member of the Education Committee, I remember when our committee interviewed you and the great job you did then, and I remember when we all took that vote and I supported you for all the right reasons. And I appreciate the fact that you're continuing to understand this issue, to stand for our values, and to work to make a difference with our ideology.
Thank you.
My two questions are, I've been speaking with many of the stakeholders, teachers, parents, and especially with school board members and administrators, and they have complained of the fact that we receive such a small, successful school districts receive such a small portion of that federal money, and yet the tests and the process costs a considerable amount of money. Right. In your expert opinion as a regent, is it safe and fair to label this program as an unfunded mandate to our successful schools?
I don't buy into the term unfunded mandate very easily, because I've heard so many people talk about unfunded mandates being in special education, for instance. And as a person that's a real advocate for special education, I'm saying, you know, there but for the grace of God goes my kid. And I think that they're not something that school districts shouldn't be doing anyhow. I think when it comes to evaluation of teachers, our districts on Long Island have done a very good job evaluating teachers. When I talk to superintendents before this begins, they say, we know that we're not going to have unqualified teachers in our schools, and they haven't for the most part.
So allow me to rephrase the same question.
Yeah. Is it extraneous expense?
Is this an extraneous expense that our districts who are struggling to stay within the tax cap shouldn't have to bear?
I believe that, and I've been urging the other regents, especially on those that are on the state aid committee. We recommend to the legislature how it should be funded, and I've suggested that successful districts be given the leeway and waive some of the requirements in exchange for perhaps even a little less money. Not that they get a lot anyhow, but I think it would save a considerable amount of money if we didn't have to have some of those onerous requirements. And not only that, I think they're counterproductive. It's not just the cost of them. They're counterproductive because of the morale issues, of self-esteem issues, and whatever else. How you define a successful district is going to be the question, and whether or not people are going to think this is somehow politically incorrect is the other question. I've been arguing that, and I agree completely with you.
So to confirm my second question,
okay,
there is a price to pay for our successful districts in terms of the educational value of that time, of that classroom time.
Absolutely, and it's not just the expenditure of every principal has to evaluate every teacher every year, instead of in successful districts, maybe it could be every other year. Maybe it could be every third year, because they've been successful in weeding out poor teachers. And you have, by the way, in addition to the tax cap for next year, you now have the health care costs for school districts that are, from what I understand, in some districts very substantial because of picking up the employer piece of the Affordable Care Act. That's something that hasn't been mentioned too much.
Well, thank you for confirming that there is a cost to our districts, a cost to our administrations, but perhaps most importantly, a cost in terms of the effect of
Right.
educating our children.
Right.
Appreciate you being here.
Okay.
Thank you, Roger. I will be brief because I know there's a lot of people here who want to speak. Let me ask you this in a nutshell. Do you think, or do you agree that this was rolled out And not that they didn't listen to educators on how to do it, but they never asked them.
I can't tell you because the regents were not necessarily responsible for the rollout as much as the state education department was. We created the policies. If it were up to us, and several of us have urged going slower on, for instance, the evaluation and the new assessment, not necessarily. I think that the Common Core would be far more successful if we didn't have these other things rolling at the same time, and we could take time to adjust to this new Common Core, and for teachers to get used to teaching it, and to have it cumulatively affect. I'm very concerned that we're going to lose what I think the good parts of the Common Core because of how it's been rolled out.
Right.
And I don't know, I think that there has been input, but I can't tell you to what degree that input was taken into account.
Well, what I mean is that, first of all, I think that many school districts had used up their budgets by the time that they then could buy additional materials, so they weren't able to get them. So my feeling is that this was a year too soon, and that they didn't involve educators in saying, how can we do it? You know, if I'm going to hire a plumber, I'm not going to sit there and tell him how to do it. I'm going to ask him, how do you do it? And I just think that it was rolled out too soon, and that's causing just what we're going to hear today. Finally, is it true that in the Common Core curriculum, it's almost a script that the educators, the teachers, and the schools cannot make any changes to
No.
teach in accordance with their practices, which they know best?
No, that's not true at all. The Common Core are a set of standards that ask, and they're very broad standards, asking for students to be able to use, for instance, more nonfiction. Because and it's still fiction, 50-50 roughly at this point with the new standards, but beforehand it was very little at all. To dig into a subject deeper, instead of a mile wide and an inch deep, to dig into it, to be able to dig in and find out what the thing is about. Those are the standards. The curriculum, which is what I think you're talking about, is not prescribed. It is, we have suggested, here are some modules that can be used. Districts did not have to use them, but many of them do because they had no option. They didn't have the money, or they couldn't figure out how to do the curriculum themselves. So, but they are. It is not, and we have districts, by the way, that are not using them, where teachers are using their creative skills to get to the standards in different ways.
Well, I think we may hear today, as we did in Suffolk County a week ago, that most teachers are under the understanding that they can't make changes to it, that it is a script they have to follow, and as Assemblyman Graff said, you know, question and then reinforce or whatever it was, all of that, and just go through the script. And I've spoken to some teachers who tell me that they're not able to use their personal and professional skills that they've always done in the past, which would have made it a lot easier.
Yeah, I think there's a juxtaposition of the state not requiring it, and it's up to a local district to adopt whatever they want to. The local district, under the money crunch, used the state curriculum, which is not mandatory, and therefore it's the district's decision to adopt this curriculum, use this curriculum, which might constrain teachers. Other districts have not necessarily adopted the state curriculum modules, and teachers are teaching in very creative ways. So,
well, we've heard a little bit of that, but we've heard much different stories, because they do feel that it's, you know, it's our way or the highway, so to speak, just like we hear from that gentleman in Washington about other things. Right? Thank you for being here, Roger.
okay.
Brian?
All right, well, thank you very much, Regent Tillis, for joining us today and answering our questions, and you know, we look forward to working with you on hopefully improving some of the rollout of this, and you know, especially the issue of trying to, you know, help some of the performing districts, you know, waive some of those requirements so that they can keep doing what they're doing.
I hope everybody will come to these forums, and because I think the Commissioner and Chancellor need to hear the kind of testimony that I think will be held.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I haven't seen it yet. Oh, wait, it'll be right here. Yes, I just got it. Okay, our next speaker is Brian DeVal from Seaford. And just quickly, as Mr. DeVal's coming up, as we did in Suffolk, and I know there's some people here that were there, you know, we certainly want to, you know, move through and make sure everybody gets a chance to be heard, but it is our goal that this forum, unlike, you know, some other forums, is done in a way that people are able to say what they want to say, we're able to ask questions, so we're not looking to, you know, we certainly want people to do their best to summarize their testimony and all that, but we're not looking to rush anybody, because we want to make sure everybody leaves here having had their concerns heard. So, Mr. DeVal, go ahead.
Well, I guess I'd like to start by answering the questions as they're written on the letter that I received. I'm here as a parent today, but I'm also a principal in Brooklyn who's lived under 12 years of tyranny that the legislature approved, giving mayoral control to an out-of-control lunatic. I'm on film with 69 days left to go for that mayor to hear that. He was instrumental in getting the Common Core and the whole reform package. Everyone uses the term education reform. What education reform is about, quite simply, is firing teachers, mainly in inner cities. If you took a map of across the United States and said, where are schools failing? It would be in poor communities of color, neighborhoods like I moved out here, I'm from the city, my children are minorities, but they're doing okay because they're in a home with two parents. But if they weren't, we were back in the Bronx or Astoria, and we were poor, and I was in a broken home, more than likely my children would not. They're special needs like Mr. Tillis' children. They wouldn't be performing. But because I have means, my kids are able to do okay. Nobody wants to address the social ills, which you did. Thank you for saying that. And I want to get up and hug Mr. Graff because everything you said was so on point. It is terrible what's going on with this whole Common Core. It's about the Walton Foundation. It's about powerful neoliberals trying to take over education so that people don't get pensions. That's all this whole thing is about. Break unions, save on taxation, because the rich, super rich, like Merrill Tisch, they don't want to see public employees get pensions. This is a nationwide movement going on across the country, and unfortunately, the Democratic Party has bought into it now with Democrats for Education Reform and groups like that. So it's something going on across the country. It's not just limited, and I'm glad I don't go with parties anymore, where it used to be Labor's here. There are Republicans, like what you guys are doing here today. I think it's great, speaking out, because now it's affecting this misguided policies that have been passed. It's affecting middle-class white neighborhoods. That's why there's outrage. Nobody cared when inner-city minority people were screaming about how bad these things were. Nobody really cared. The Daily News is down with this. The Post is down with it. Newsday appears to be down with it. But now, all of a sudden, up in Poughkeepsie, John King got his head handed to him by a sophisticated, intelligent group of parents. He canceled the meetings. I think he should be removed. He should be embarrassed and resigned. Now, for me to say that as a public school, I want to make sure, since I'm on film, I didn't come here as a representative of my union, which I am. I'm a chairman of CSA in District 14. But I don't know where my union stands in this. I know where I stand on it as a father. That's who I'm here as today. I'm also here as a principal who's had to live with these craziness. And that's all this is. Look what they're doing, kids in kindergarten doing bubble tests. Where is childhood going? I mean, everybody up there should talk about what they've done to children. It's an absolute disgrace. So I didn't come here for applause. You can look me up on YouTube. I'm at every protest in Brooklyn when we fight about the school closings. That's what this is about. They opened an office in the city called the Office of Portfolio because this lunatic thinks he owns the public schools in New York City. And he wants to put condos in or give them to charter schools. That's the element Mr. Tillis left out under the application. Charter schools had to be doubled. Find me a charter school in a rich neighborhood in this state. They don't exist. They're private entities, again, set up to take away pensions from public school educators. Shame on us that we passed this. So getting back to what I bulleted, withdraw from Race to the Top. The money did not come to my public school where I work, nor to any school on Long Island. Give Obama back his money. Every morning I'd wake up, on my way out 5 in the morning, I'd see the same commercial. President Obama wants to give New York State $700 million, but the teachers union doesn't want you to get money for your children. Our children didn't get that money. Computer corporations, testing corporations, big business got all that money. None of it came to Long Island, nor to my school. It went into Pearson education. Ask yourself, and I don't know who the governor was at the time when this came up, Pearson wrote this. The governors go out and get wined and dined. They go to national governors. Do you really think, whether it was Pataki or Spitzer or whoever was at that meeting, that they read the Common Core? It was written by a British corporation, Pearson. They handed it over and said, don't you think all children should have high standards? Of course we do. Well, you should vote for the Common Core. Eat your salmon. That's what they did. And they passed this insanity, brought it back packaged in all kinds of promises of money, and good-intentioned people like yourselves probably were up there and said, sounds like a good bill, we're going to get money for New York, let's pass it. But nobody read this in detail. So give them their money back, because it's not going to children. Testing is not learning. You could give me, and I had, I think, 1,000 on my SAT back in the day. If you would have given me test prep in Kaplan, maybe I would have gotten a 1,200. You could put me in an NBA camp all day. I'm never going to play on the Knicks or the Nets. It's not going to happen. Kids can only go so far. Test prep is not learning. But this is what they're doing to kids, because more testing, more testing. Give education, please, back to educators. They asked about who's been a teacher. Meryl Tisch taught, I believe, for about a year in a yeshiva. With all due respect, she's in a position because her husband's a very wealthy individual, and I'm sure she's a well-intentioned lady of really, really good ideas. But that's not being an educator. She never taught long-term in an inner-city public school. Dennis Walcott taught, I believe, for 6 months or so in a Christian Academy kindergarten. That does not give him the right to have the waiver you guys seem to have given him to be my boss and tell me how to run a school. But all these people in authority who never taught and never ran classrooms or schools are going around telling us how we have to rate teachers so we can fire them and get rid of their pensions, when none of them ever taught under these conditions or was rated this way. It's a sham, it's a farce, and it's a disgrace. Save us from everything that's been going on here. I think you should put your egos in your pockets. I know some of you may have voted for this stuff. This is a time to reflect and say, maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we need to stop this. People will respect you if you realize you stood up and said, we did something that wasn't so good, but we want to correct it. I appreciate that you're having this hearing. I don't think they want to hear. I don't think John King wants to go. The arrogance of what I saw him say is, and I believe I heard the governor in today's newspaper said something to the effect of, well, people will like it better when they know about it. Your sign says no more. I know a lot about the Common Core. I don't want to know more about radical Islam. I don't want to know more about communism. I know I don't like either one. I know as much as I need about the Common Core. I don't want it. Please take it away from us. I could go on all day, but there's a lot of people here. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for joining us. We have a few people, I think, that have some questions or points they want to make. So, Al Graff.
No, you're a great vehicle to go where I want to go here. What school in Brooklyn?
PS 257, District 14.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I've been pointing out for the last 2.5 years, since I've been up there, is that once the state got involved in education, they screwed it all up. And one thing I want to get to with you, the other thing that I'm looking at, we require every kid to get a Regents diploma, okay? And when the commissioner came up there, he gave me the graduation rates. And for high, low needs and moderate needs schools, it was 73%, which means that 3 out of 10 students are dropping out. For high need schools, it was 62%. Which means 4 out of 10 students were dropping out. Now, for my colleagues that are in the city, they're telling me some of their dropout rates are even higher than that. Now, when I went to school, right, we used to have a choice between a Regents diploma and a General's diploma, a career track and an education track. We had wood shops, we had automotive shops, we had electrical shops, we had an LPN program. My sister-in-law graduated with her LPN from high school, has worked ever since. nursing homes who can't get nurses would love to have LPNs, all right? And the bottom line is, my feeling is we need to go back there. We need to give kids
Amen.
an option.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to see what you thought about how we've been driving education for the last 10, 15 years.
They've been driving us into the ground. We're tired. We've had it. We just want to be left alone. We wish people would. We've had an education mayor for the last 12 years. Maybe we need someone who wants to be the fire department mayor. Let teachers just teach, for God's sake. It's too much already. People, every time you turn around, it's a new decision. And the same out, again, I'm a parent out here of special needs children who, thank God, because they're under the current system, they're going to get a local diploma this year. Next year, that's gone. I was in high school, I remember, Powell Memorial in Manhattan, and a brother said, son, you need to take chemistry next year. I said, brother, I don't want to take chemistry. He said, you won't get a Regent's diploma, son, you'll ruin your life. I said, brother, can I go to college with a local diploma? Oh, yes, you can. I took Italian, I went to Italy, I speak Italian, it helped me in my life. I never took chemistry, I never became a pharmacist. I'm not an axe murderer. I think there's a lot of kids who could do a lot with their lives without having to take physics or some of these Common Core things that, quite frankly, they don't need.
Yeah, well, one of the arguments that they make is you need the higher end, learning math and stuff like that in order to get the job as a electrician, as a carpenter, and I
I'd
said
cut
that-
my fingers off if I tried to be a carpenter. It's
Right.
just not, do you know what I mean? There are certain sets of where we should go, but when you get to physics, and I never took trig.
I don't
that
need
was-
physics, okay, in order to use a tape measure.
Right.
I don't, you learn the math and everything else that you need for your trade.
Correct.
Specific for your trade.
Correct.
I don't need higher-end mathematics in order to be a carpenter. And there's nothing wrong with being a carpenter. There's nothing wrong with being an electrician. Have you paid one lately?
They make more than I do.
Okay.
And God bless them, they deserve it.
So, what I'm looking for is input from everybody here. I think that Common Core is in the wrong direction. I think we're pushing education in the wrong direction. Thanks.
And thank you for everything you're doing today.
Thank you, sir. I think we're good.
Thank you.
Dana Friedman with the Early Years Institute. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
We heard from you in Suffolk, and we're glad to have you here again.
Yes.
Talking about the work you guys are doing and how this all intertwines with the
Yes, thank you
early
very much.
childhood education issues.
And I'm going to paraphrase my remarks. You have the written testimony. I'm founder and president of the Early Years Institute, which is a regional organization working on school readiness. We accomplish this by working with communities and developing partnerships so that all children arrive at school ready for school success. Now, we don't say that children arrive ready to learn, because children are born learning. And that means that the experiences that children have before they get to school are what's really going to predict how they do in school. In fact, just the front page of the New York Times on Monday, we've known for a long time there's a gap between the number of words that children from low-income families have compared to children from more affluent families. Now they've shown that knowing the number of words that 18 months old have, you can predict third-grade reading scores. So we know early on, the whole state of Delaware and Maryland have changed their systems and talked about early warning signs in pre-K and K for high school dropouts. They started working in high school for 5 years. They went, we got to go earlier. Let's go to middle school. We got to go earlier, elementary. They're down in pre-K and K to anticipate the number of kids who might eventually drop out. So these early years are very critical. And so I want to talk about the Common Core and testing in the context of pre-K. And it's a little different than the K through 12. It's very clear the direction of policy in this country is that the schools are going to play a larger role in the delivery of early childhood services. Just about every governor has done it, including Andrew Cuomo. The president mentioned it in his State of the Union address. And I think what's important, it's not just getting kids ready for school. That's hard enough. It's about getting the schools ready for the kids. When in 2006, when New York State allocated a huge sum of money, about $450 million for pre-K, Long Island got $36 million. We returned $11 million because districts didn't want to offer it. There were over 6,000 children who could have gotten pre-K services and did not. Now there were about 53 districts out of the 118 elementary school districts. Now there's about a little over 60 of the districts. We interviewed every superintendent on Long Island to find out why. Why did some of you do it and some of you not? A lot of the districts told us that they didn't have space. That was the biggest problem. But they also didn't know about the community programs that might offer that to them. Many others said, well, we don't want to get involved with that because those programs in the community are babysitting. And the problem is that without the lack of knowledge about the services that exist or what they're really intended for and how they work, their view of them as babysitting, we've allowed pre-K to unfold on Long Island without the benefit of 40 years of practice and research on early childhood. They're very different in the 53 and the 60-odd districts that have them, and some are doing a wonderful job. Some, however, give me great pause. And in that context, pre-K foundation for the Common Core is really helpful. What you've got are a lot of teachers who are from 4th grade, 5th grade, upper grades, who have never been trained nor student taught in a class of 4-year-olds. And we are pushing down elementary school into pre-K, which talk about developmentally appropriate practice. It is completely inappropriate, such that I have visited enough programs to think that they actually do harm. Because you've got principals, the pedagogical cultural leaders of the school, who also don't have a background in early childhood education. Our current system of certification from 0 to 2nd grade, you can take one course in early childhood education and be certified. That does not make for a really good teacher in these things. And I think without exposure to child development theory and best practice, it's very, very difficult for teachers and administrators to take Common Core concepts and apply them in the classroom. And so my plea to this esteemed panel is that we find more resources to assist schools in the implementation. I very, very much agree with Regent Tillis that there are elements of the Common Core that are worth taking a look at. And particularly in New York State, the Board of Regents created the New York State Pre-K Foundation for the Common Core. We had a session last week. We had 80 pre-K teachers trying to explain how to use the Pre-K Foundation for the Common Core in a developmentally appropriate way. And the biggest difference for pre-K than for the rest of elementary school is it must be child-directed learning. When you are giving scripts that you're talking about, that many schools are giving teachers, it's not only hurting them and stifling their creativity, it's not working for the kids. It's absolutely not working. In pre-K, when you use this as a model, it's just a framework for what you should be doing, we are finding it really helpful. And these teachers walked out of this session thrilled that they now had some way to understand what the real Common Core was for pre-K, and they plan to use it. We now have 25 principals coming to another forum that we're doing to help them better understand and help their teachers. I have far more concerns about the testing than I do of the Common Core and how it's been used. I just saw a study that really blew me away, and it's about the increase in the prevalence of ADHD in children in the United States. In 1990, we had 5% of school-age children with ADHD. In 2012, we had 11%. So what's causing this increase? And what's interesting is in 1991, ADHD was incorporated into the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Now, children who received a diagnosis of ADHD can get free tutors and get more time on standardized tests. In addition, there was a whole lot about the drugs that were more easy, that could be marketed directly to parents, and we were giving children a lot more drugs during this years. The recent study from a Berkeley professor started wondering more about why there was this increase, and he looked at some differences in different states in the prevalence of ADHD. North Carolina had 15.5% of their students in elementary school in ADHD. California had 6.2%. What he then tracked was when the state implemented No Child Left Behind. And he found that North Carolina was one of the first states to do it, California was one of the last. And when he looked across every single state, found that when a state passed laws punishing or rewarding schools for their standardized test scores, ADHD diagnosis in that state would increase by 22% in the 4 years after No Child Left Behind was implemented. That's just the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of things that are happening with the high-stakes testing, and you can ask any teacher, obviously, and what it's doing to them and their ability to teach. I recently saw a poster at a parent rally that said young children should be blowing bubbles, not filling them in. Testing is very inappropriate for a lot of kids, but it is really inappropriate for 4-year-olds. What a 4-year-old at 9 a.m. is very different than a 4-year-old at 11:30 a.m. I mean, their mood swings go crazy. It's very hard to get a handle on. Doesn't mean you shouldn't test, and we shouldn't have a sense of how well they're doing and their progress. But you can't be using the kind of testings that we're doing now. And large part, we're finding everything's getting pushed down in elementary school to pre-K. You got some pre-K programs doing 7, 8, 9 different tests on the 4-year-olds. To try to understand why they are. Part of this is that we don't have a test that really measures the whole child, all the different elements of what's going to help that child succeed. And I know Tom Rogers always says one of the ugly truths about testing is that we can only test what we can measure, and what we can measure isn't always the most important thing. In early childhood classrooms, study after study after study has shown it is the child-teacher interaction that is the most important and predicts child outcomes. We don't have a tool that looks at that. There's a couple that are developing now, but no one's using them here on Long Island. And so if we are going to test, and yes, there's some utility in doing it, at least make sure that the tests measure what's on the curriculum and is related to professional development. And we've seen studies in a couple of other states where they look at, pre-K testing, evaluation, and professional development. They don't align. And then does pre-K testing, curriculum and professional development align with first grade and second grade and kindergarten? No. And we know there's an incredible body of research that the more alignment there is between pre-K through 3rd grade, the better the child outcomes. We're not making any attempt to use these tools to make sure that kids are having the optimal opportunities for learning, and that's my biggest concern. And I want to close by just mentioning another kind of assessment that I hope we can start looking at in this state. It is being used around the world and in about 60 communities in the U.S., and that's a population-based measure. I've been to see most of you, I believe, in talking about the Early Development Instrument, the EDI. It was developed by teachers in Canada and is being used around the globe. It covers the whole child. It does get at all the elements of what's important to predict and all the domains that are in the pre-K foundation for the Common Core. It's easy for kindergarten teachers to complete. It's not a child test. It's based on observations. And I do faithfully trust teachers to observe their children and make some assessments about what they need. I don't think you need a lot of tests to do it. So they're merely observing how children are behaving, and then the data are reported back by neighborhood. So you get a map of where children are hurting, and that brings community people out to help solve the problem so teachers don't have to deal with all the ways in which the children are not ready. And in Westbury, where we did this for 2 years, over the last 3.5 years, we now have 70 agencies, the schools, parents, the Chamber of Commerce, the civic organizations, pediatricians, the library, implementing over 25 different initiatives on literacy and help to make sure that kids are arriving at school ready for success. We think that the EDI and other tests like it would be far more useful to the community and to the parents to help their children and help the teachers teach. It's very clear that schools can't address all of the problems that children are coming into school with. And I think that anything that can leverage community partnerships to help children actually get the support they need would be welcomed. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for coming again, and I think you made a very important point just in terms of children at that young age with the testing, and a kid at that age understanding, working hard to maybe pass a test and all of a sudden something that he's basically set up to fail, and that could be very, devastating to a child. That's really, and we're seeing this obviously all along the gamut of grade school ages with this, but for a child to comprehend that we're going to throw a test at you that you basically know you're not going to do well on, but it's going to help us, create some metric, really is harmful to that age.
We don't need it. Absolutely don't need it. But I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in the Common Core yet. I know you're all opposed to it, but I think there's some elements. And much of it, I just saw a webinar yesterday for 4 hours with the developers, the authors of the math and the English language Common Core they've been teaching 50 years, and they had a crew of hundreds of teachers who worked on this. The separation of the Common Core and how it's been rolled out and implemented and tested, is that distinction is really a problem.
Yes, thank you.
You know, I mean, I can speak for myself. It's not, the bottom line is, it's not that I'm opposed to the concept of Common Core, but I have a real problem with the fact that educators weren't included in writing it. That's the problem that I have. All right, they left the educators out of it, and that's where I have a problem.
The curriculum design, the way it was rolled out, yes. The actual writing of the Common Core, not so much, from what I'm hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Marla Kilfoyce. Right there. Hi. And just so we're ready, Gary Bennett will be next.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank all of the members of the Assembly for holding a forum in which parent and teacher voices can be heard. I think that's very important. I was called here to testify today as a parent, but I also would like to inform you all that I'm also a teacher. I want to have some transparency here. But I want you to understand that I'm not testifying as a teacher today because that voice has been silenced and it has been marginalized. Before I go any further, I would like to qualify myself. I'm the mother of an 11-year-old boy with special needs. My son has significant cognitive delays. He has been his entire school career about a grade level behind. He was adopted from Russia at 9 months old. He is my only child. He's an amazing kid with amazing gifts. I'm also a teacher. I've been a teacher for 28 years. I have a bachelor's degree in social science, and I have a master's degree in education, and I'm national board certified. I am also proudly the general manager of a Facebook group called the Badass Teachers Association. We currently have 30,700 members nationwide. Our goal is to save the dismantling of public education. I am here, however, to speak to you today as the mother of an 11-year-old boy. His name is Kirill, and I want you to look at him. This is my only child. When I received your letter, I noticed that you had some questions on it, so I would just like to go down the questions just to address them because I don't want to divert from that. The first question was, are there components left out of the Common Core standards? My answer to that is yes. Based on my experience as a mother, the components they're leaving out is the student's prior knowledge and the one-size-fits-all. For example, my son can't divide. He can't do double-digit multiplication. He can't convert a fraction to a whole number. And I don't blame his teachers for that because they have had a straitjacket put on them because they must adhere to a script and they have to keep moving. So my son last year in the 4th grade didn't master the skills I just mentioned above. But this year in 5th grade, they want him to be able to convert a fraction to a whole number in order to do math problems. For example, a homework question this year was, if Texas is 17,500,000 square miles and Florida is 1/10 the size of Texas, how big is Florida? How can a child do that who hasn't mastered how to convert a fraction or even do double-digit multiplication or division? Throw on top of that, he's working a grade level behind. So what they left out of the Common Core is the ability of an educator to veer off the script to remediate children. It is a one-size-fits-all curriculum. It is a curriculum that says to the teacher, that we will all be doing this topic on this day at this time. Well, what if a kid is working a grade level behind or has not even mastered the English language like some of our ELL kids? What happens to those kids who can't do that topic at that time, on that day? The teacher is forced to teach it, and she must move on, or he must move on. To quote one of the great educational researchers, Linda Darling Hammond, standards should be guideposts, not straitjackets. Your second question, are there unnecessary components to the Common Core? My answer to that, yes. The unnecessary components to this set of 4 standards is that they don't honor the child's unique ways of thinking and learning. The Engage New York modules that we've all been speaking about once again script the teacher to a certain subject on a certain day with a certain time limit. They script what the teacher must say and what the student is expected also to say. My son, due to his cognitive delays, has had to have instruction delivered in a certain fashion. He's a visual learner. Common Core thus far hasn't given him that. Once again, I don't blame his teachers because they've been placed in a straitjacket that they have to teach to this script on this day at this time. As well, the Engage New York modules, which are Common Core based, don't recognize that he takes a little bit longer to learn, and so do other kids. But his teacher has to leave him behind because she has to move on. Last year, he was 4 months behind, which I celebrated that. I celebrated he was 4 months behind. At the end of last year, he was 9 months behind. I will probably have to estimate when he is tested this year that my son will be a full 11 months behind. I am not happy. He's worked way too hard. The scripted curriculum has killed his ability to be creative in school. It's killed his ability to use his imagination. And it has killed his ability to be able to dabble in innovation. Your next question. Was the implementation of the new curriculum based on Common Core standards handled appropriately? No way. The implementation was a mess. In their haste to punish kids, teachers, and schools, NYSED rolled this out in such a fashion that now we are enmeshed in a system that is insistent on sanctioning and punishing our children, our teachers, and our schools. The Common Core cheerleaders like to use the term college and career ready. Well, guess what? I don't want anybody talking about my 5th grade son being college and career ready. That's ridiculous. The last question. What can be implemented to improve the transition to the new curriculum? Well, quite frankly, I'm going to say scrap the Common Core and give us back our New York State curriculum. It was fine, but if we were going to be forced to adopt the Common Core, which it looks like now we're being forced to do that because, unfortunately, we're selling our kids out to Bill Gates and Pearson, then I would suggest taking at least 3 years to develop curriculum resources that teachers can select, adapt, try out, refine, and maybe go into professional development courses and look at how it can be flexible. I would suggest that if teachers say it's not going to work, that they be given the flexibility to find the things that work for their students at that time on that day. I would suggest that we scrap altogether teacher evaluations tied to test scores. And I'm not just telling you that because I'm a teacher. And I'm really going to be embarrassed to tell you this, but I was rated highly effective, and I'm not proud of that. I'm embarrassed by that. Rating teacher evaluations or teacher effectiveness based on test scores has never proven in research to show that a teacher is effective. If you base a teacher's job on a snapshot, that is a test score, well, sorry folks, they're going to teach to the test. That's bad for kids, it's bad for education. But let's say for intent and purpose that you were told that your jobs would depend on your performance tomorrow. What would you be doing today? You would be preparing for tomorrow. It's the same concept. Teaching to the test has created a stressful environment that's transferred to our children. My son is certainly feeling the effects of this. He hates school. He has developed anxieties regarding all testing, even a spelling test. As well, I feel this curriculum needs to be scrapped because it focuses on just ELA and math. So in lieu in what we have now, we've had to push out the things that kids love about school: science, social studies, art, music, recess, and physical education. We have pushed out all these things for test prep for the ELA math state tests. Most, if not all, of my son's work that comes home is ELA and math. I'm really confused. Why are we all so willing to sacrifice a generation of our children for standards that we know are not appropriate for the age? All right, all one has to do is examine the data on prefrontal cortex that are a one-size-fits-all standard that don't give our teachers the flexibility to tailor the curriculum to the diverse needs of our children. Last year, my son refused to take any exams. We allowed him to take the baselines. We allowed him to take the first day of the ELA exams. He got into the car. I said, "How'd it go, buddy?" He said, "Mommy, why were they trying to confuse us? Why would my teachers write a test that tried to confuse us?" We were done. Sorry, I lost my spot. Anyway, when we went into this year, we immediately refused him from all exams. He is not taking any exams this year. The reason that we have chosen to refuse my son from all exams is that those exams that these children are taking are not directly placed in the hands of their teachers, so their teachers can diagnose them, make a plan for instruction that will be tailored to their strengths and weaknesses. These teachers don't even get these exams back. It's like going to the doctor. The doctor gives you a physical exam and tells you, "Come back in a year. Maybe I'll have your diagnosis for you." If we had not refused him this year, he would have taken approximately 28 days of testing for teacher evaluations as well as state exams. Including that, the other approximately 15 days of testing he needs to do to update his IEP for special education services. Add on to that, the amount of time for him to take these exams is extended by 1.5. So if we add up all these days and times, he would be taking close to 2 months of exams. 2 months, and this is for a special education kid who has ADHD. We look to Finland as the pinnacle of education. Well, in Finland, they have low childhood poverty. We're approaching 25%. But in Finland, they give 3 exams, one in the 2nd grade, one in the 9th grade, and when a Finnish child graduates, they take a test to matriculate into college. But they don't have to do that. They can actually go to college without taking a test. So they take 3 tests during their entire school career. We plan to have kids take exams every year, including pre-K, that they're in school. Last year, like I said, we didn't refuse my son out of tests. As the year went along, he got more and more stressed. He didn't like school. The work that was coming home, all ELA and math, subjects he hated. The math homework was very difficult for him because he hadn't mastered the skills to do it because the state decided to throw the Common Core curriculum at schools midway. My home became chaos from 3 to 8 o'clock at night. I had to hire a tutor, a cost I couldn't afford. He became frustrated, sad, turned off to school, and my relationship with my own son, my only child, was strained. He hated me because I made him do homework. Imagine how that must have made him feel. I feel importantly that the testing that has come with the Common Core has created an environment of segregation in our schools. A separation between the kids who get it and process it quickly and those that don't are left behind to struggle. Those of course would be most of our special ed and ELL kids. The high-stakes testing that was introduced into our schools last year is killing education in New York State. Our schools have become test prep centers. They're killing our kids' abilities to be creative, imaginative, and innovative. Bottom line is, when you tie a teacher's job to a student's test score, it's going to narrow the curriculum and they're going to teach to the test. New York State once had a broad and expansive curriculum, one that held in high value the arts, the sciences, vocational education, math that was age appropriate, ELA that blended fiction and nonfiction, social studies that allowed children to explore other cultures, physical education that allowed them to learn and hone their physical skills. But most importantly, a period of recess where kids could learn social skills and problem-solving skills as they play. We don't have that anymore. Schools in New York State have become test prep centers, intimidation, sanctions, punishment, a place of segregation, but most sadly, a place where kids are frustrated on a daily basis, anxious, tired, and just not allowed to be children anymore. I would like to say in closing, I'm beyond angry. I am now in fighting mode. And I'm your worst enemy, because I'm a mom with an education. Commissioner King can call us anything he wants, but all of you need to hear loud and clear from the parents that this new reform movement is hurting our children. Parents are not going away. We're going to change this because we have to. This is about our children, and we will not let them to be sold to Bill Gates, the Walton Foundation, or Pearson Testing Company. Thank you so much for your time and consideration, and I was going to ask you one other favor, Assemblyman Graff. Do you see Commissioner King at all? Do any of you see him? Occasionally?
Yeah, I'll see him when we have the...
Can I please give you a copy of Diane Ravitch's book to give to him? I don't know if you have any questions, or I'm sorry.
I'll be very brief.
Okay.
Thank you for all your insight and all the research and for conveying it in such an important manner.
Thank you.
I just want to make one clarification.
Okay.
We are not your enemy. We're not the enemy to you or to anyone else in this room.
Good.
We are on your side. It's a reason. This is why we're motivated to do this.
Good.
And we are in lockstep with you and everyone else that is here. And that's a very important ideology to embrace.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you again for testifying. And just for the knowledge of everybody else here, we are streaming this live, so there are people watching throughout the state that watched us at our last hearing, and we're going to be visiting the other parts of the state. And I hope that, you know, testimony like yours today, coming forward on behalf of your child, will, you know, encourage and inspire others as we make our way through the state to come out to our forums and have their voice heard as well. Mr. Gary Bennett. And Mr. Bennett will be followed by Noah Blumenthal and Eileen Stanton.
Thank you, gentlemen, for putting this thing together for us today. I want to give special thanks to Joe Saladino, who's our direct assemblyman. My name, of course, is Gary Bennett. I'm the president of the Massapequa School Board of Education. Mr. Saladino has been extremely accessible at this time. Every meeting we've asked him to come to, everything that he could make, he has made. He has made an input, and he cares, as I'm sure all of you do. I'm not a professional educator. I'm retired from law enforcement after 27 years. But being on the school board, I see the very deep and profound interest that teachers have in our students, even when they're being ridiculed. Now, I think it's very hard to be a teacher over a long period of time anyway, because complacency is something that I'm sure they fight all the time. So when you talk about evaluating a teacher through testing of their students, how limited is that? There's so much more to a school teacher than that. There's the attention that they give to the students, the care of their students, the care that and interest that they provide for the parents, in addition to fighting some very serious some issues within the educational systems. They have to wonder, through shortage in our particular district, through short personnel, if they're going to have a job tomorrow. And this, I'm sure, is the issue across the nation. But with all that, when Hurricane Sandy hit Massapequa, our teachers came to the aid of their students immediately and their families. They brought bottles of water because we, as Mr. Saladino can tell you, South Massapequa, along with a lot of Southern Long Islanders, was pretty well devastated. But in Massapequa, we have a very strong sense of community, and that's what makes our school district what it is and why it's one of the best in the state. It has little to do with state mandate and little to do with how the Commissioner of Education and the means of educators are going to dictate how we teach our children. It has to do with how our teachers teach and the interest of the parents with those students. That's the core of education in Massapequa. I think Mr. Saladino can verify. Now, the problem with this Common Core is it's taking our teachers away from the classroom. As the lady who spoke before me, they're teaching toward the test because they have to. What happens now is you have a child that comes home, and I've gotten, my school board has gotten hundreds of letters of protest from across the country, all the way to Massapequa, about that a child comes home and says, "Mommy, when am I going to do my plant experiment in school? I'm not doing that anymore. And I want to do science." Or another child says, I want to read that book we were reading. What happened? Everything stopped. Now we're going back into Common Core. I'm sure I don't have to belabor this. This is, I guess, going to be repetitious to all of you as the evening goes on, and you've heard it all before. But in Massapequa, we had a spring exhibit that brought great interest from the community at large, the mom, the dad, the aunt, the uncle, the neighbors, to come in and see the child's work. We had to put some teacher time back into the classroom, and unfortunately that had to be eliminated. And the parents were extremely upset about it, but what can we do? The teachers needed more time in the classroom, and this Common Core has been an issue with that. I think when we look at, I think the funding of this, as we've been talking about, or you have mentioned, in Massapequa, we've estimated it's going to cost us about $40,000 to $50,000 in order to do this testing. We're not quite sure yet, but that's the estimated amount. What New York State continues to do to school districts is apply these mandates and even other mandates that we can't keep up with. Now you come down and you give us a 2% cap. Well, I think most school districts can attest to that our teachers have a 2% salary increase over a period of time. The longer they work, their rate of pay increases by 2%. Well, 2% generally in every school district is about 80% of the budget. So look at the position you're putting a school district as large as Massapequa into. You're saying make do with your budget while 80% of it is already accounted for. And yet we do it. We've cut our budget by almost $12 million in the last 2 years. And our teachers have come to the call as well, because during Hurricane Sandy, due to the beating our community have taken, they've been very, very receptive in their contract negotiations and took less than 1% in their pay increases. Our administrators our administrators had not had a raise in 2 years. And over 3 years, we're given only 1% pay increase. So what I'm trying to bring forward to you is that in my particular school district, our administrators and our school teachers have done every single thing that this governor required of them and has pushed upon them from a small community. We have to realize that every teacher in Massapequa or any school district on Long Island has to live on Long Island, which is riddled with high taxes. All of the elements that living on Long Island bring that I know you know about, they have to deal with and we have to deal with in our budget. It only comes out of a small group of people, 80,000 homes, but yet it's almost 1/3 of the county police budget that we have to fend for, and that's why the taxes in each Long Island home are so high. So my answer to you is, where's the state? Where's the state and state aid? Where are they? I know you gentlemen argue this, and I don't mean to put the burden on you, because upstate New York has problems, in counties up there, and also the school districts in need down here. But when you look at the governor who promised all of southern Long Island or southern New York more state aid because of the storm, we were actually cut. Merrick was given about 2 or 3% more state aid after Hurricane Sandy. Now that's a pretty good parallel to Massapequa, to give them that additional aid. So why were we cut? And when you look at a school like Brentwood School District, which already receives $200 million a year in state aid, 2/3 their school budget, they were increased by another $9 million. So what I'm saying is, there's so much wrong with state education far beyond the Common Core that's going to have to be dealt with, because it's going to collapse. It's beckoning now. Do students today want to be school teachers when they know that their future is unsure? We fortunately are doing everything we can to keep our teachers and keep our class size and keep the structure. But it's getting more and more difficult as the vice tightens more and more every year. Gentlemen, I don't know what the Assembly and the Senate can do, but it appears to me that we're heading for ruination far beyond just Common Core. The budgeting, where is the money going to come from? People are leaving Long Island in droves. People's children cannot stay here. This is an old story, but look how tight it's getting. I'm on the school board. We look at this budget and we tear it apart every single day. And what are we going to cut? What are we going to look at? Where are we going to go? How can we not do this that's going to, so we can keep music, we can keep art, we can keep athletics. This is what makes a well-rounded American. You can't eliminate these things as other school districts have had to do, and that's what it's coming to. But the school areas that are getting the lion's share of aid, what are they producing? Are they increasing? Are they any better this year than they were last year? The answer to that is no. So when does a merit clause enter into this? When do we say, well, just because you're a school district in need and you're getting a lot of aid, we'll give you even more if you improve. However, you're going to stay at that level if you don't improve. Isn't that some kind of incentive for the poorer districts to do a little bit better? I think it is. But when you have a school district like most Long Island school districts that exceed year after year after year, and you cut their aid and cut their aid and cut their aid, and put the burden on the taxpayer to see to it that we hold on to our good teachers and our good administrators. They have to be paid. They have to live here. They have student loans to pay in a great many cases. So what I'm saying is that the educational fallout right now goes well beyond the Common Core. I can't speak as well on that Common Core because I'm not a professional educator. But I can say this, in talking to my school superintendent, who is quite a remarkable woman as far as education goes. She's very, very, I make jokes that I think she could teach a brick to swim. This woman, she's that good. But there is a place for Common Core if it's done, as you say, Mr. Graff, with the input of teachers and educators. This was put together, as you all know, and I'm being repetitive, by far too quickly and too haphazardly. But we do want to challenge our students. We do in Massapequa in every way we can. We want to push the envelope. We don't want to push it off the table, but you want to push it. You know, I remember when I was a pole vaulter in track, when you start out in junior high at 6 feet, then you go to 6'4" or 6'5". You don't go from 6 feet to 12 feet. And this is what's happened here. And when you consider special education, I don't think it's that hard to understand how devastating that is and how discouraged students who may have had an incentive to go to school and like school could very quickly turn about. And this is coming from a layperson, not from an educator, because I see it. I've talked to parents about it. I've talked to parents who want us actually to be civilly disobedient. It's getting that serious. And of course, we can't do that. But the basic problem is that the communications in government in this particular Common Core situation is lacking. And I don't know why that is. I don't know how that is. The thing that disturbs me, I think anytime you get the federal government pushing the state to push into the local school district is concerning to me, particularly when you have school districts that have done well for decades. So what's the change? Why the change? I can understand you want a higher curriculum. You want your students to do better. You want your children to achieve. We have that. And we'll take any challenge this state has to offer, except the budget vice is getting too tight. And, that's in your ballpark. I don't know how we're going to be able to sustain teachers' salaries as they are. And for the work they're doing, they have to get paid. They have to be rewarded for what they do. But you can't keep going back to the household where individuals who work for accounting firms or lawyers or business people or truck drivers, you can't keep going back to them saying, we need more, we need more, we need more, we need more. We've been doing that for decades. And the state is saying, giving us less and giving us less and giving us less. That's a formula for disaster. And then you come up with this, where we have to come up with another $50,000 in order to make something work that isn't working and isn't going to work. So you have to tie the budget in with everything else, because money talks. Money's the issue.
Out of the 50,000 that you're talking about, how much money did you get from Race to the Top in the school district?
None.
Okay. And just one other question, all right? Since this Common Core, since we're starting to implement that, because you're on the school board, you're the person I need to ask, what effect has that had on the morale of your teachers and the morale of your parents in the school district?
Mrs. Iaconis, I think, will be speaking to you tonight. She'd be more adapted to answer that. But from the parents I personally spoke to, they feel some of their children are devastated by this. Some of them. Some of them are taking it well. But I got to tell you, as far as our teachers, I'm amazed. I'm amazed that they understand that this is part of their job and they have to deal with it. So they are dealing with it. They don't like it. I'm sure that they don't like it. I haven't spoken to that many. But the ones I spoke to, they're troopers. They're going to do what has to be done to educate these children. But, as I explained to you, it's taking them away from their students. The student-teacher relationship has been disturbed greatly. And that's not what you want. You know, I think when you went to school, when I went to school, sometimes your teacher was like the greatest thing in the world, and especially in elementary school because you're with that person all day. It's like a surrogate parent. And now you're taking it and said, no, Sarah, no, Johnny, you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this. But I want to do this, and I want you to read to me, and I want you to... These things are grossly disturbed, and that relationship is the core of American education, and always has been. To change it now is dangerous and foolish. We can push our children. We can push the envelope. We can give them harder assignments. We can give them a new way of thinking. Like, are any of you gentlemen attorneys, by the way? Any of you ever take the LSAT? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. You had to come up with to take the LSAT, you have to come up with a different way of thinking, right? Did you have it before you were trained to take that exam? No. I'll take any doctor of education, I'll give him an LSAT, I'll walk away, and if he's looking at it for the first time, he's not going to pass, or she is not going to pass it. And a 60, by the way, in the LSAT will get you into a fairly decent law school. Only a 60. That's how difficult that exam is. Difficult because it's a different way of thinking. So what you've done here, or what the state has done here, is they've thrown this at our students, including special ed students who at times are already frustrated, and tell them, take the LSAT, kid, you'll do it, don't worry about it. Very, very frustrating.
I just want to bring out a point, because it's been the theme here today and from other hearings that we've had, that I just have to make this comment so that you're aware of something, because it's become keenly aware to us over the last several years. I mean, I'm going on my 5th year there. Most of us are relatively new in tenure in the Assembly, so we learn these things through the hearings and as we request information. But one of the things that we're going to have to start doing from here on, and we've already started, there's some legislation that's been introduced, is for the legislature to take control over the state education department. Right now, the Board of Regents, which is elected by the legislature by just a basic vote, and we only get their resumes a day or two before the vote, and so procedurally myself and many of my colleagues, we vote against them. As a matter of fact, this past year I voted against a particular regent and raised the question about this regent is the president and CEO of a testing company that does business with the state education department. So you talk about a conflict. But the regents appoint the commissioner of education, we do not. They are not answerable to us. They're the ones that pass these mandates down. We don't vote for them. This Common Core, we didn't vote for it. They have the authority to implement it. So by these different pieces of legislation that we have introduced, we intend to address these shortcomings, because we're one of the few states left in the country that still use a Board of Regents for its education system. Mostly all the other states, the Commissioner of Education is answerable directly to the state legislature. We also want to put a lid on the mandates that state ed can push down to the districts unless they come to the legislature first for funding approval. So a lot has to be addressed, because all these weak spots have come to light in these issues. ARP, most of us voted against it. It just doesn't make sense. It's not logical. But just so I put this out there to you, so that when you start hearing about this legislation coming out and are arguing about it, that we could get the support from the public, because this is not going to go down easy. Possibly taking away the regents in this state and letting the governor and the legislature have control over the state education department is going to make a significant difference, the way things are done, the way funding is done, the way mandates come down. Or if we alter the statutory authority of the regents and keep them, but make them more answerable to the legislature. So I just want to throw this out to you, that this is not short on us, we're watching it, but these are the cracks that we've seen now come to the surface. So there's a whole system that we have to address here. But just when you talk about unfunded mandates, while the legislature could be responsible for a few things, The state, and I'm not trying to get us out, but I just wanted to explain, it is the state education department that sets this down to you, and they don't have to come to us for permission to do it or for
understand.
funding. So just so you could be aware of
I
it.
understand extremely so that it's a very complex issue all the way around.
Right.
And
Because I served on a school board, I had the privilege to be a school board president, so I understand very well this problem that goes on, and that's why and most of us have similar backgrounds. You know, there's many members of the assembly have been school board members, school board presidents, so we have an idea, and that's why we're just trying to take this to task the way we are.
Gary, I just want to thank you for your important testimony today, and on a personal level, thank you for your kind comments.
You're welcome.
It's
I just want to add one more thing. I think that the $700 million that was offered by the president for Race to the Top, that when you consider that $700 million was given to Fire Island to replace their beaches, and you're talking about educating an entire state on $700 million we're trying to award school districts, that's not enough money. That's an insulting amount of money. Because if you're going to educate children here, and you're going to want to ease the burden, particularly on the Long Island taxpayer, you're going to need by far more money than that. So my question to you, gentlemen, is when is the federal government and the New York State government going to start putting their money where their mouth is? Because we can't afford to sustain education on Long Island. It's coming to a head. And you know, when is the governor and when is the president currently sitting going to understand this? We're going to need money, and we're going to need by far more in state aid. So it's going to have to be redistributed.
Gary, the answer to that question is we have consistently and continuously fought for more. I am one of those people who has legislation which would create a regional cost index which changes the state aid formulas to reflect the fact that it's so much more expensive to do business as a school district on Long Island, and that districts should be rewarded. Massapequa is a prime example of that. The work you and the school board members, and we have members Joe LaBella and Tim Taylor with us, and all of our school board members continue to do an excellent job and grapple with the lack of funds. And I think Albany punishes successful districts. And we have seen this financially punishes successful districts. But I do want to thank you. I want you to know we put this bill forward. It has a Senate sponsor, Senator Ken Laval. Many of our colleagues have legislation like this and sponsor legislation like this to protect our Long Island schools. This legislation, the Regional Cost Index Bill, passes the Senate under Senator Dean Skelos and the leadership. The problem is that when it reaches the New York City-controlled Assembly, it is continuously defeated, if even let on the floor. So this is a regional fight that goes on and on and on. The Campaign for Fiscal Equity is proof of that. We are as concerned about this as anyone, and we will continue to fight. But I do want to say thank you. I know there are many other people who want to speak. I want to thank our superintendent, Iconis, for the great job she does. And one of the facts of success in our school district, where I've been there since kindergarten, when we have a high school principal that's grabbed up by another school district to become the superintendent, that speaks well of his abilities, but it says so much about the great job you're doing in Massapequa. Thank you.
All right, Noah and Eileen.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Assemblyman, for this forum. Thank you all for attending and speaking. My name is Noah Blumenthal. I'm representing the North Shore Parent Action Committee from North Shore School District in Glen Head, New York. I'm going to try really hard to make my comments about stuff that hasn't been said. There's been a lot of really wonderful stuff said. So one of the first things I want to speak to is I think we have a big problem in that we have confused what is developmentally possible with what is developmentally appropriate. It is developmentally possible for the median third or fourth or fifth grader to learn the math that they are being asked to learn, but it is not developmentally appropriate. We cannot push our kids just to what is possible. We have to give them freedom to learn in the way that is best for them now and for their future. And what we are asking them to do is not good for their future. We must eliminate the pursuit of the highest possible standard at the lowest possible age, and instead look at what creates a well-rounded, developmentally strong child. So, Assemblyman Graff, I think it was you earlier who asked, who are we competing with? What is this big, scary country or world out there that we are so afraid that they are going to start beating us, that we have to overhaul our school system in this way? We still win more Nobel Prizes than any other country. We still produce more patents than any other country. Other countries out there may be catching up in terms of how many engineers they produce, but they are not catching up in terms of how many entrepreneurs they produce. They are not beating us in terms of the creativity and the entrepreneurial spirit that we produce yet. But if we continue on this path, they will. There's wonderful research from the University of Oregon's education department. It's all on a site called Zhao Learning, Z-H-A-O learning.com, which reviews how when you pursue this testing strategy and the degree to which you push high-stakes testing is exactly inversely correlated with the entrepreneurialism, business success, professional success that those students achieve later in life. So why are we chasing the standards and approaches of the countries that have consistently demoralized and destroyed their children's creativity? The purpose of school is to create love of learning. Love of learning. And I would actually say that beyond that, one of the purposes of school should be to create love of teaching. Something we haven't talked about here really in depth today. Love of teaching. We have, over the years, the teachers' union has gotten stronger and stronger. Yes, and there are some people who don't like that. But we have reached a place in time where teaching is actually a really desirable occupation, not just because of the beauty of it, but yes, because of the financial reward of it, and it should be. We are getting to that place, but right when we are at the cusp of being in a place where teaching is a really desirable profession, we are destroying any desire anybody would have for it, because we are telling the teachers that you have to do this simplistic, rote, painful, agonizing process over and over again, year after year. Anybody who's ever been in a job like that knows this is not the way to produce engaged, enthusiastic, energetic employees. And when our teachers aren't engaged, enthusiastic, and energetic, our children will not be engaged, enthusiastic, and energetic. I keep on going back to who wants this. This is the thing I really struggle to figure out. Who wants this? You know, if I want to go to the movies and my kids don't, I win. We go to the movies. If my kids want to have ice cream and my wife doesn't want them to, usually my kids win and they get ice cream. We figure out how to deal with our disagreements. But when we all think the same thing, we do that thing. I have yet to meet the group of teachers and educators and administrators who want what we are doing to our schools. If the teachers said, we don't like this, But the principals and the department heads and the administrators across the country said, no, you don't like this because it's new, you don't get it, but you're going to get it, you're going to like it, then we would say there's a conflict there, there's a disagreement, and maybe the teachers need to be pushed out of their comfort zone. But when the teachers and the department heads and the principals and the superintendents and the school boards are all saying the same thing, we have agreement. We should listen to agreement. Frankly, I think any time in this country where the progressives and the Tea Party agree on something, we should just make it law. I personally will be opting my kids out of all state testing. I told them that before last year's test. I told them to go through it last year, but that was going to be the last year. I don't know why I had them do it last year, but I did. But they're never going to take a state test again. And frankly, my kids weren't even anxious about it. They just don't like it. But they weren't anxious about it. They did well. This is not a big deal for them, those 3 days, 6 days, 6 days, 8 days, depending on which grade. I actually think that some really enterprising entrepreneurial mind in this state or across the country should create camp opt-out. For the days when your kids should be or would have been in school going to these stupid tests, we have a camp that is going to bring in science and music and art and social studies and all the things that your kids have been craving but have been forced out of our curriculum. For those 3 days that you're opting your kids out, send them to camp opt-out. And you know what? In this country, someone will create that because we create brilliant, creative, entrepreneurial minds, or at least we used to. You know who's still creating those? Those minds, those beautiful, creative minds? Private schools. Private schools are doing that because they're not implementing any of this. There's a reason they're not implementing this. They know how destructive it is. People have already talked about the APPR and how destructive that is to be connected, so I'm not going to go into that. We haven't had a lot of conversations about, a lot of talk about this, but the stories in I go to every school board meeting just about, and at every meeting where this is discussed, parents stand up and talk about kids breaking down in tears, the anxiety, the loss of sleep, the hatred of school. All of these things we're creating in our children. $700 million sounds like a lot of money in one way. In other ways, it sounds like a little bit of money. The amount of money that our school districts are paying for these tests every year, I was actually shocked at the figure of $40,000 for Massapequa. In our district, the figures that we've been given are closer to $400,000. When you add up all the different costs, when you add up the test prep materials, the testing that's, itself, the training of the teachers to proctor the exam, the paying for the substitute teachers, the additional proctors during the exam, and the substitute teachers to cover for the teachers who have to be out of school after the exam because they have to grade tests. When you add all of that up, we're paying a lot more than 700. Was that we're not getting 700 million a year, are we? Is that was a one-time thing? So for a one-time thing, we're paying more than that. Statewide, we're paying more than that every single year. And not only are we paying it in money, think about the costs. Let's talk about the time costs. At the beginning of the year, we do pre-testing. We lose days of education because of pre-testing. And I mean days. The test itself may be 90 minutes on any given day. But any teacher will tell you that your third grader, your fifth grader, your elementary school, and my kids are in elementary school, so that's the perspective I'm bringing. Your elementary school kid is spent. A 90-minute test blows the whole day. You're done. So we take away days worth of school in September. But you know what? Life gets better. October, November, December, our kids get a decent education. January, test prep starts. Whether you think so or not, test prep starts in January. Some schools it starts earlier. In my district, it starts in January. January through March is test prep. Education goes downhill, creativity, any sort of interesting projects go away. Then in March and April, we have the tests themselves. Those weeks are shot. Forget about 3 days of testing. The whole week, 5 days is shot. When you do 3 days in a row of the stress and anxiety, as well as the time taken, there's no learning in those days. And then we have post-test. So you'd think the rest of April, May, June, we would get good education back. No, we don't. Our teachers and our kids are exhausted. They are spent. For the love of our kids, for the love of our teachers, we have brilliant, wonderful teachers, and we're destroying them. Please, I'm against the test. I'm against the Common Core. I'm against one size fits all. I'm against all of these ideas. And by the way, I think that the notion of this is destroying some really productive, creative ideas that the legislature itself could be implementing. We could be coming up with creative solutions here. If we talked about successful districts not having to take the test, being able to get out of the test for a couple of years, I say successful districts should have to take the test once every 10 years. That would solve the whole thing right there. For as far as the successful districts, there's still a lot to be solved at the unsuccessful districts. But there's so many creative solutions. But the moneyed interests and the momentum of this are destroying the ability to talk about any sort of creative solutions as well. So those are the things that I want to say. Please, please fight to the bitter ends on this. Thank you.
Mr. Blumenthal, thank you very much. The greatest part of these types of forums is that you hear all different aspects of the common question that's before us, and you take away different things. I love that Mr. Bennett, right before us, brought up a very important part that has been overshadowed. I mean, there really is two components to this. It's the educational part, and it's also the monetary part that's fallen by the wayside that we're really not even looking at, and you briefly touched upon it. On the educational side, just with regards to where I stand, I agree with Mrs. Friedman, who actually found some type of value in the Common Core, or at least the intent of Common Core, with regarding having some type of standardized evaluation system across the country. I think there is value in that. I think there is also value in having greater expectations, placing greater expectations on our kids. I think nowadays that's not a bad thing. But I represent Rockville Center, I represent all the communities between Lynbrook and Freeport. And Rockville Center had the biggest opt-out quota on Long Island, and they had, I believe, over 300. And those parents, I sat with those parents, and they had very good reasons for opting them out. And what I found really interesting in both what they said and actually what Mr. Bennett said too is that my total feelings on Common Core is that the intent is right, but the bottom line is the mile wide and the inch deep philosophy has worked for us on Nassau and Suffolk. We have by far the best school districts in this state, if not in this country. And to actually hoist this upon our school districts is unfair and unwarranted. And that's what we should be focusing on. The majority of our school districts in Nassau and Suffolk didn't need this Common Core. That was really designed for the Big Five and the problems that they have associated with it, and that we're being forced upon to deal with it. And with regards to the second part of the educational part, to tie the testing to teacher evaluation, let's be perfectly blunt about it. All that was is a political hammer to get at the teachers. That's all it was, and that's what it will continue to be. Listen, I proudly say that I voted against APPR because I think it was a load of garbage. I think it was a way to get at the teachers at a time when, you know, teachers aren't the most popular people in the public's eye, and they do a great job, and I think that we got to stop piling on the teachers. We got to figure out a way that we can, provide the best possible education to our kids without scapegoating the teachers when the test scores aren't to the point where we think are acceptable. But here's the most important part. With regards to the monetary part of this whole equation, this just one more time reiterates that when you give up local control, and all of this, for the most part, comes down to dollars and cents. We made a conscious decision here in the state to accept federal monies and to give away part of our rights to determine our educational system. So, I signed on to Mr. Graff's bill to get us out of Common Core and to get us out of Race to the Top, not because I don't believe that there is good parts of Common Core. Listen, and where you have, a lot of people said they haven't found a teacher that actually likes the system as it is. I haven't found too many teachers I haven't found one teacher that hasn't told me the intent behind Common Core isn't a good thing. I think what we have to do is we have to remember the next time that the federal government holds out that carrot and says, hey, listen, we'll give you this amount of money, just all you have to do is do this, and you have to do that, and you lose a little bit bar of your freedom in determining how your kids are being educated. We got to remember that going forward. Just one last thing, Mr. Blumenthal. The one thing that you did say that I disagree with is that you referenced private schools. Unfortunately, and I do mean unfortunately, I sat through a 2-hour seminar in a private school on the Common Core, how just about all of the Catholic schools in the Diocese of Rockville Center is adopting the Common Core. To my disagreement, to tell you the truth, but they have decided to do it. But with that said, they aren't tied to the same teacher evaluations because they are outside the public school system. So with that said, I just think that moving forward, we can't lose the intent of what we want to gain in the Common Core by scrapping the entire system, and we must be realistic. To be perfectly honest, I'd be willing to give back the $700 million tomorrow, but I don't believe that that's going to happen. So we have to work within the framework that we believe can be achieved and try to go forward, making sure that we give the best education to our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Something happened at one of the recent school board meetings in my district where the superintendent heard some of the comments being made and said it's really important for us to understand the difference between the state test and the Common Core. And when he did that, it changed the conversation dramatically. And I think what I hear and what you're saying is, I think the next distinction we really need to start making is differentiating between the Common Core standards and the Common Core curriculum. With the Common Core curriculum, we are pushing at the rate of Pearson and the test industry. I'm all for, if you want to show us what are Common Core standards of what is developmentally possible at a given age and what is developmentally appropriate and what should be developmentally expected for the top kids, the median kids, and 25th percentile, however you want to break it down, I think that's really valuable for teachers to have. But as soon as you have Common Core and APPR, you have three things. When any of the three of them are connected to one another, things go downhill. Common Core, APPR, and testing. They have to be separated. And even if you take separate the APPR, the Common Core and the testing is still going to be the Common Core curriculum and the Common Core standards, along with the testing, are going to be a bad combination because it's in Pearson's best interest to make the tests harder and harder and harder, so more and more and more of our kids fail, or so that at least a similar number fail every year. Even if our education gets better, our teaching to the test gets better, they're still incented to push to make the test harder for the kids to keep up with, so that they make more money. So we have to separate those three out. So long as we have state testing, I'm against Common Core. If you get rid of the state testing, I'm all for the Common Core. And as far as the teacher evaluation goes, the thing that I've been advocating in my district, and I think we should, superintendents across the state should be doing this, just max out your teachers' scores. As a district, you get to determine 80% of their score. 20% comes from the state test. Give every teacher who's a quality teacher, a passing teacher, the exact same 80 grade. And you take away all of the power of this idiotic APPR. I know that's not in your hands, but, you know, we're being taped, and so maybe someone will hear it.
Say one thing, Mr. Blumenthal. Here's the thing, just going back to your first point with regards to the testing themselves. You know what, the private companies, you're right, they're easy targets, but a lot of your criticism is true as well. But don't forget the other equation in that. You know, we shotgunned this test this year to a curriculum that we didn't even teach. And that was a decision not by the companies, but by us in whether it be the board, whether it be the Department of Education, whether it be the legislature. It was us. And we shouldn't have done that because we used our kids as pawns to figure out a test that they couldn't do well in. And just moving forward, how about we not make our benchmarks after the test is given? Let's start making the benchmarks before, so we actually have a determination of what's going to be good and what's going to be bad. Because I gotta tell you, when you do the benchmarks after the test, it kind of leads people to believe that that test has nothing to do about evaluating our kids. It has more to do about politics and how we're gonna look at teachers and what our scores are gonna be. So next year, that maybe we're going to come back and say, hey, look at this. Our scores increased 20% over this new test. You know what? That raised my attention and kind of makes me a little suspicious about the whole system that we're going into. And I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to put that out there.
No, that's fine. I appreciate it.
One of the other things that I was showing, the APPR, we missed the first round of Race to the Top because we didn't have APPR in. So the governor said, we got to do that quick to get done the second round. And so we added APP collectively, not just. Added that, and then we got in the second round. The two should not be connected. I like your idea that who can judge the teacher better than right there in the district and the superintendent.
Well,
it's a good idea for the superintendents to do that. Take the power away from us, from the education department.
I think your question is a really important one. Who can judge better than who's on the ground? There is, this entire movement speaks to a complete and total lack of trust. It's a slap in the face to the school boards who are responsible for hiring their superintendents. It's a slap in the face of the superintendents and the administrators who manage their principals. And it's a slap in the face to the principals who judge the teachers, and it's a slap in the face of the teachers who judge the kids. Nobody in here, I can't even believe anybody at Pearson actually believes that test can better evaluate their kids than the teacher who spends the whole year with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.